Triple Shot Mindset. So I was watching this documentary last weekend that was recommended to me by a very close and wonderful friend, and she watched it with me. And it was called House of Hammer. And it was about the Armie Hammer cannibalism scandal. Armie Hammer is a young actor who starred in The Social Network, Call Me By Your Name, and was set to star in like Death on the Nile and a couple of other major blockbuster films that were coming out. He had this trajectory as a Hollywood actor in the upward
My
fashion.
favorite word.
Exactly. And then all these text messages started coming out about him tying women up with like the ancient art of Japanese hog tying or something. I'm paraphrasing this, but he would essentially have these young impressionable women love bomb them ferociously, like give them all this love and attention over the course of a couple of months, like call them 22 times a day, text them all the time. And then once they trusted him and they were in a relationship, he would start doing this, what he called BDSM. So bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism. But what was really happening is he was pushing their boundaries. It's like in BDSM, I think there's a safe word where you say like pineapple, like that means you've gone too far, please stop. I just made that one up, but I think I saw it in a movie. Anyway, I digress. Long story short, he would pass their boundaries and do things that were dehumanizing, and the text messages started coming out and whatever, and his whole career kind of like took a dive, or temporarily has taken a dive. And in the documentary, it talks about his entire family. And if you listen to the stories about his parents and their parents, you can trace the origins of this behavior all the way back down the line, like multiple generations of violence against women, misogyny, weird sexual perversion, just all the way back to Armand Hammer, his great-grandfather, I believe, or maybe just his grandfather. I'm not sure if he was great or just grand, but I digress. I think it's interesting to see, for me as a psychology major, how parents influence children's behavior, and then their children's behavior, and then their children's behavior, and so on down the line.
It's it's also more intense in immigrant families, right? Being Middle Eastern, I feel like my parents even had more of a reason to keep us a certain way and pass on certain belief systems onto us, even though they had no proof that they were working for them. They just pass it on to us anyway. And I think a lot of Middle Eastern people, they feel, or Eastern culture, they feel like their parents are molding them into a version of themselves. And all the abuse that goes on behind the doors in the name of, we got to have respect for the elders. We're going to put you down because you have an opinion. All those things start creating a person that at age 20, 25, they want to either rebel against their parents or they become another version of the parents and just continue the cycle. And it's easier to continue the cycle because you don't get any pushback from mom and dad and grandparents. So for me, it was really eye-opening when I had my major change in the way I see things about a year and a half ago, that my parents, that is, they thought they were doing the right thing by overprotecting me, by telling me how to live my life. But it comes down to their insecurities and what other people may talk about or say about them behind their backs. And that was enough of a reason for them to push us into certain directions. So my dad said, and my mom, both of them said, we came to this country for you guys to be a doctor, lawyer, or
engineer.
And for a kid who has dreams and ambitions of becoming something else, you really don't have that choice. And that's just like from a career standpoint, because they tell you, well, if you want to become a meteorologist or a designer or a whatever, I mean, what are other people going to think? Your grandfather never did that. Your grandmother never did that. Your great-grandfather worked hard to da-da-da. And they kind of guilt you into a mold of themselves that they think should be done. And even though they were unhappy growing up because they were pushed into that mold, they kind of push that upon you. So a year and a half ago, I started questioning. I mean, I don't question their love, but I do question the rationale that they blindly just pass on to you. So I decided not to think about what they're saying, give any weight to their opinions. It was just something that came in, and I observed it, and I graciously said, no, thank you. If it was up to them, they would say, don't date anyone. Your kids are more important, which they are. But don't date anyone. Don't do certain things. Don't go certain places. Don't put yourself on social media that much. Don't write a book and confess the things that you did wrong in your relationship, because other people may look at you as a loser. So I do think that parents and how they treat their kids creates broken people, and those broken people will pass it on unless they consciously decide to put a stop to it.
Bravo. I could not agree more. I've written poetry on this, articles on this. I've had so many thoughts on this from what I've experienced and observed. And when you mention immigrant parents, it really resonates, because one of my parents is an immigrant, first generation. And Cubano. And I've noticed that immigrating, or I guess it could be emigrating, because they're leaving, or you could say it either way, is a huge trauma, is in and of itself. Because these folks who are leaving their home country and their culture are abandoning everything that they've ever known. And I sometimes wonder if that causes them to cling a little bit harder to the old ways, because it makes them feel like they're still connected to home somehow. And I don't know if that's behaviors, toxic patterns. It could be anything. But there's like this old world mentality that I feel like immigrants carry even more strongly than those who are several generations removed. Because in America, everyone's an immigrant, or like if you trace back far enough in the generations, somebody was an immigrant. But for the recent immigrants, the first generation immigrants, it's like it's still so fresh, the wound of having left home. It's like, oh, we're going to identify even harder with the things that our parents did. And speaking to what you said about caring what other people think, I've noticed that strongly in both of my parents' cultures. Now, my father was born here and is white. My mother was born in Cuba. And I've seen it manifest in both instances, but what will people think vibe. It just kind of shows up as a different behavior in both of them. For my mom, I think it was more kind of covert. She didn't usually ask the question like, what will people think necessarily? But speaking to sort of like what your parents said, well, be cognizant of what you put on social media and watch the way you portray yourself, and, you know, cry beautifully. Like when you cry or show emotion, don't make it ugly, because you don't want to make people uncomfortable with, you know, you being a person, emotions. And these were never like negatively rooted. They weren't to be mean. It was more like a safety thing. Like, I'm looking out for you. I'm protecting you. Like, you got to keep the image. And then for my dad, the white culture, speaking up, it was more about, okay, what's your career like? Are you moved out of the house yet? Can you support yourself yet? Are you in a relationship yet? Like, are you doing all the things that the Joneses or the people I'm going to talk about you at lunch with, are you going to be on par with all their kids? Like, it was just a social thing. Like, we're all comparing each other subtly under the, not even under the table, like very, very flagrantly. So I saw it show up in both, but differently in both. And I wonder, is that a generational thing? And are newer generations growing out of that? Or is that just like a human nature thing? Or is that a survival thing? Like, what is the root of be careful with how other people see you?
I've seen in some Persian families, the dad, let's say he's a chauvinist. The grandfather was a chauvinist. The uncles were chauvinists. and their kids turn out to be chauvinists, right? There's no one that closes a gate and says that's wrong, because if, God forbid, someone speaks about grandpa's infidelities or his chauvinistic behavior, he is not supportive of the family, right? So you have to kind of bite your tongue as a kid. Like I saw, for example, my grandfather, may you rest in peace, he didn't have a good marriage because he was the cause of the infidelities and stuff.
Oh.
But the kids would still run around, Daddy, we love you. Like my dad, I love you. I want you to be proud of me. I'm like, well, he just broke your home, your household. Why are you guys protecting that? Why aren't you guys bringing that into the open and publicly saying, no, you don't do that, Dad. Like, that's our mom. Like, how dare you? And as a result, my dad did the same thing. My aunts and uncles did the same thing. And I hope no one's listening, but everyone to an extent carries on that kind of a toxic behavior, whether they actually cheat on someone, whether they are abusive to their wives, whether they are dismissive of their needs, whether they don't hold any space for them and just boss them around. So no one stands up because they think standing up to an elder is, blasphemy. So the fact that me or one of my aunts, we speak up against these things, we are kind of shunned.
The black sheep.
Black sheep. These guys are crazy. Why are they talking? Why are they bringing our dad down? Why is he publicly talking about his grandfather on this podcast, right? And unless someone calls these people out, I think it's going to continue. So if my dad, for example, had certain issues with taking care of my mom, I don't want to be the same one and just say, oh, well, my dad did it, his dad did it, my grandfather did it. There has to be a line that you draw in the sand, and it's going to be difficult, and people are going to push against it and say, well, why are you doing that? Why are you going against the family? Why didn't you marry who I told you to marry? And at one point, you just draw the line and say, this is it. I'm not going to put up with this BS anymore. And the reason my ex-wife and I decided to maintain a very healthy relationship after the fact is because we wanted to stop all those generational traumas from seeping into the next generation. Yeah. And we have to keep our mouth shut sometimes because I feel my mom and dad channeling themselves through me, trying to control my kids and tell them what to do and what not to do, aside from obviously not, crossing the street without looking both ways. But I feel like I have to bite my tongue and work on myself, and Nona has to work on herself to kind of dismiss what our parents keep whispering in our ears and make our own path so that our kids aren't dealt another hand of preconceived circumstances that they have to abide by.
If you took your mom and or dad's advice, is it usually the same advice they both give you?
Generally.
Because your parents are divorced, and yet they're both giving you the same advice, sort of.
Yeah.
Like an old world, be more cautious, what are you doing? Yeah. Close your shell, like stop being so open. Yeah. It's obviously a protective thing, they think. If you took their advice, do you think that would enhance the quality of your life?
No. It would create less friction.
Between you and your parents.
Yeah.
But not in your personal life.
No. It would slow it down to a crawl. It would be depressing to live the same life that they're living right now. No offense to them, but the amount of caution they have and the amount of the preconceived programming they have from generations past, it's like they're both lonely.
Yeah.
They're both miserable. They both look at their lives as something that was wasted in a way. And so they want to pass it on to me because it's safe. And I just don't subscribe to that anymore.
Why?
Because if you do as they do, you're going to end up where they are.
Yeah, that's so true. So what's the missing piece then? Because they're both intelligent people. This is not an issue of intelligence. It's an issue of trauma. So the trauma and the fear. Now, do you agree that immigrating to this country plays a role in it? Or do you think they'd be the same way if they never left?
They'd be the same way, in my opinion, because the Middle Eastern culture is so deeply rooted into perception, other people's perception of you.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people in my culture are pretentious. We try to all create this facade that we are better and we're good and we're healthy and we're vibrant and we're happy, with excess makeup, with excess, cars and black shirts and gold jewelry and a lot of perfume, by the way. And
our viewers and listeners can't get a sense for that, but
BMWs, Mercedeses. So we try to create a facade that we are better and we are superior and we're happy, but deep down, those cultures that I come from, most of them are miserable. And they're miserable because they're following the footsteps of the people who came before them. And each generation implants more trauma into the next, more guilt, more everything, to a point that they control who you marry, how many kids you should have, where you should live, what kind of job you should have, and what the man's role is and what a woman's role is. And even though none of that has proven successful for any of them, they still pass it on to the next one.
What is that about?
I don't know.
Like if you were in science, well, let's say you're a doctor, you're a heart surgeon.
How'd you know?
I know that's one of the preferred career paths in so many cultures, not just Middle Eastern, but doctor is like one of the gold standard careers for so many people. Let's say you are doing some kind of ventricular, I don't know, connection, or you're trying to heal someone's heart as a doctor, and you realize if you slice a certain artery or vein, you kill the patient. And you go, well, it failed, but I'm going to teach my protege to do the exact same thing. Yeah. That would never fly in medicine where people's lives are at stake, right? You'd be done, your career over. But in life, parents, it seems, don't necessarily, they're not thinking that logically. They're like, this is the way I do it. This is the way I was told to do it. The level of, and we were just talking about this yesterday, self-awareness, not self-consciousness, like being worried about how you're perceived, but the level that people are able to look at themselves objectively and say, here's how my behavior affects the world, it seems very small in previous generations. Would you say your parents look objectively at themselves and say, this is how my behavior affects the world at large?
They do, to an extent.
Okay.
But they don't want to admit that they're wrong.
Say more.
So they say, for example, I know, like my mom calls me Maman, my dad calls me Baba, even though those mean
Mom and dad.
But they call me that.
Yeah.
I know that I'm extra protective of you. I know my advice doesn't make sense, but just do it for me. Right?
Yeah.
I know me telling you not to date doesn't make sense. I know me telling you to date only Persian doesn't make sense. I know me, doing this and that and telling you should become a doctor or lawyer doesn't make sense, but just do it. Okay. Yeah. So that's why I have these, I don't want to say clash because it's not a violent kind of a pushback, but when I sit down with my mom and we want to have tea and we want to talk about things, I steer clear from anything having to do with my life, from my growth, from my book, from anything, because as much as I love her and I know she loves me, she's always constantly worried about what if something fails, and references things in her life that she thought were working. But then I call her out on it. She's like, you don't have to go find a woman because you're lonely. Okay, Mom, so why did you at age 25 leave home and marry someone you didn't love? Oh, I did it because I want to be lonely. Oh, so you're telling me not to do the same thing even though you got the result you weren't looking for. So now you're telling me to do the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or my dad says, what? Like, oh, you have to be promiscuous. You have to test out different women. Don't tell him about the other one. Like, do this. I'm like, how did that work out for you and your marriage? Oh, well, it made me miserable after 40 years of being single now. So why are you asking me to do the same thing? So to me, it's like really conflicted because they want me to abide by certain things that they think should work. But in reality, it never worked for them. And so when I tell them I have a great co-parenting relationship with my ex-wife, they're like, well, that's not going to work because your grandfather and grandmother decided to do that and that didn't work for them. That's why me and your mom never did it. Well, I'm doing it. So they don't put any effort into understanding why their parents passed on certain things to them.
Mm-hmm.
They just blindly follow it. And I think that's a disservice because if you blindly follow it and then give me advice based on the same blind logic, then I'm going to have a next generation of idiots running around who are going to be womanizers, who are going to be chauvinists, who are going to be doctors and lawyers and unhappy doing it, and are going to be inauthentic to themselves, driving black Mercedeses and gold chains and perfumes that you can smell 2 miles away. Like, why do that?
That's a great question. I have no idea.
Yeah.
When did you say, I don't care about your advice anymore? What age? Because it wasn't in your 20s, right? It wasn't in your 30s.
Actually, it was. The first time was, I said I want to become a meteorologist.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what? You want to study meteors? I'm like, no, meteorology is the study of the weather. I'm being a weatherman. And they're like, well, we came to this country under the premise that you guys will become a doctor, lawyer, and engineer. Like, why can't you just be a computer scientist? Like, why do you have to go against the grain? And that's when we start pushing against that. And my dad said it was a half-ass kind of a threat that I'm not going to pay for your schooling if that's what you're going to do. Mm. And I said, I don't care. So we went and opened up a Citibank card. I think 18% interest. And Kevin and I started going to meteorology classes and changed our major, and we started paying for our own college tuition. And my dad thought he's paying for it all along, but he only paid for like 2 semesters.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so after we were done, he said, well, I hope you guys know that I paid for a major that... I'm like, first of all, Dad, what major did you study? Agriculture. He said, I went against my dad's advice and I said agriculture. Okay. And you're telling me what to... So that was the first pushback. The second one was like my mom said, oh, you can't date that woman. She's not Persian. She's this, she's that. She's very focused on her career. You don't want that, Mom. You want someone who is... So all these things I started pushing back against, and finally the past year and a half of my life, I'm like, Mom, like, I cannot sit here and just nod my head because I'm doing you and me a disservice by just nodding and pretending I'm trying to be a version of you that I don't want to be. Mm. So.
And if you told her, like, this is not a disrespect to you, in fact, your choices have helped me understand why I want to make the choices I want to make. Do you think that would help it?
I think she would get a little bit offended at first. And then she would get worried. And then she would get offended some more. Mm. And then worried some more. And then she would call me in about 3 months from now and tell me that what I said wasn't really what she wanted to hear.
Yeah. So in other words, no. It would not go well to have that.
No, that's why I stopped talking to her about my life decisions.
Yeah. Mm.
She said the book you're going to write, don't put your name as the author. Find a pseudonym. I said, why? I want to put my name on it. I want to contribute to society. I want to go on book signings. I want to like talk to people about my experiences. No, I don't think that's a good idea. As a matter of fact, change all the references, dates, names, ages, sexes of the people that you're referencing. You can leave other people in there, but just change your own identity. Why? I don't know. Maybe one day a lawyer will read that book and take the kids away from you.
Wow.
What? Like, why did your mind go over there? And they don't know that this is all part of the generational crap that's been passed on from generation to generation, and no one stood up and said, enough is enough. Mm-hmm. I know you weren't born, but there was a China or Taiwan, Tiananmen Square, and there were these tanks rolling into the city square, and everyone was just standing on the sidewalks, just scared that the military is moving in and they're going to take over the town. And one person got in front of those tanks and just sat there, and the tanks would not go anywhere. Like, he stood in the way of those tanks. Even though there's millions of people lining up the streets and like scared that these tanks are going to take over the town and their country, it took one person to sit in front of that tank, and just all the rows of tanks, 20, 30 of them that were rolling into town, they had to stop. So I'm going to be that man standing in the way of those tanks while everyone else is going to complain, oh, well, our life sucks, I don't want to be this. I'm going to be the one standing in front of those tanks and say, sorry, not on my watch.
Triple Shot Mindset.